Friends, our second reading this day comes to us from the New Testament from 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 to 24, which I believe can be found on page 240 in the New Testament section of your Pew Bible if you like to follow along. So let's listen now to what the Word of God has to say to us this day. We know love by this, that He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. How does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's good and sees a brother or sister in need and yet refuses to help? Little children, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And by this we will know that we are from the truth, and will reassure our hearts before Him whenever our hearts condemn us. For God is greater than our hearts, and God knows everything. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have boldness before God, and we receive from God whatever we ask, because we obey God's commandments and do what pleases God. And this is God's commandment, that we should believe in the name of God's Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as God has commanded us. All who obey God's commandments abide in God, and God abides in them. And by this we know that God abides in us, by the Spirit that God has given us. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Just out of curiosity, what would you do for 21 grams? Now, I guess that's a little presumptuous because I assume you know 21 grams of what? I could be diamonds, could be precious metals like gold or platinum, could be some other precious gemstones. Your mind is sort of free to wonder what 21 grams of whatever. Let's assume it's precious gems. Let's presume it's something that has great value. Would you work hard for it? Would you try to see if you could sneak some away to steal some? Would you give something of yourself in order to have it? What if I reframed the question, and instead of not giving you a clear idea of what if I asked, what would you do for a human soul? 21 grams is, after all, what Duncan McDougall believed the soul weighed in his questionable 1907 experiment, conducting a series to see if the human soul did have weight. Even if his experiment is not something that we can hold as scientific truth today, it gives us a moment to pause, to reflect, to ponder what we would give, or if we would give, for someone else's heart, for someone else's soul. For the sake of a sibling, for a brother or a sister who has a need in our midst. And if we choose to respond, if we choose to give or to take action, why? The ancient Johannine community disciples of John, who this letter is addressed to from 1 John, were particularly mindful of this question. They were particularly mindful of how they conducted themselves, especially aware of how they were to embody the teachings of Christ. Laying down one's life as Christ did in service to neighbor was paramount to living a Christian life. It wasn't enough for someone in this community to say that they would simply pray for you or that they would say good words to make you feel better. They believed that in order to do more, to live as Christ would live, they needed to put their words into action. They needed to follow in the footsteps of Christ. They needed to expand their capacity to love to the point where loving hurt. To lay down one's life for another, like Jesus, meant to offer one's time, one's energy, one's material resources and prayers, because that is what Jesus would have done. At the core of this sacrificial love and acts of service was the heart of Christ. This, I think, is one of the biggest differences when we think about how we live a life as a follower of Christ versus how we would just go about our daily living if we just tried to do the best we could without any form of faith. It's not as though people or a person without faith can't do any good works or service. I think just looking around, we know that's not true. And I don't believe the Johannine community would believe such things. But what we find in the reading for today and what we should be concerned about, at least for us as people of faith, is what is it that grounds us when the hard times come, when things get tough? What is going to be the source of life, the source of energy that we can draw upon to keep acting out God's love, even when that seems impossible? The ancient Christian community was worried about this. They were worried about our tendency to give in to fatigue, to give in to hate, to give in to malice. Earlier in the reading, they explicitly say, "Let us not be like Cain." They wanted to make clear and to remind people not to give up because there is a greater force, a greater love that will carry them through whatever life throws at them. What is this great love that we're supposed to draw upon? It's not an ordinary love. It's love that models the heart of love, agape love, as they would say in Greek, which is something I find beautiful about this version of love, or the different degrees of love the ancient Greeks had, and they were able to articulate it in ways that's a little more complex for us in our modern day English. They had this word agape, this highest form of love and charity that reflected God's deep love for us and for creation, and reflected our deep love for God and one another. And this love is key, because as we consider how we love, how we put love into action, we're not talking about something that is abstract. We're not talking about abstract love in the sense of how we think about doing love, because as we are reminded in the reading for today, we look around and we see a brother or a sister who's sitting next to us. We see a sibling who is sitting next to us, and those are the people as well we are called to express this type of deep love to. How do we love our brothers, our sisters, our siblings more deeply? How do we love them more deeply in a way that stretches our capacity to put our words into concrete acts? I understand at times it's difficult to love. And while I may not seem like the type of person, I do find it difficult to love while I'm behind the wheel in certain situations, stuck behind a slow driver. But we are called to stretch how we love. To stretch how we love beyond what we think is possible. As we view the world today, love is often this thing we portray as being done exclusively within the bounds of what we think is comfortable. what we're comfortable doing in terms of love. But God asks us something else. God asks us to dig deeper, to know that even in moments of weakness, there's strength that overcomes what we think is the end of our capacity to love. And we're assured of this. We hear in the words of our reading that God is greater than our hearts and God knows everything. God knows how difficult life can be. God knows that we do not always get things right. But still, God demonstrated the ultimate act of love, an act of sacrifice. And this act reassures us that there is strength for us to call upon and free us from the constraints we've placed on ourselves, so that we might love more deeply than we believe is possible. God is greater than our hearts, greater than our temptation to give and to serve, to love minimally. God's vastness overcomes the narrowness of our perspectives, overcomes our fears, and enables us to love not just within what is comfortable, but to love radically and unreservedly. It's a love that does not calculate whether we will gain or lose. It simply gives. Thus, as we strive to embody this agape love, we lean into the source of life that encourages us, that empowers us in our weakness, and does not condemn, but strengthens us. Being reminded of what God has done for us, and the type of love we are to model, what would we do for 21 grams? What would you do for a brother or a sister or a sibling who is sitting next to you this morning? What would you want someone to do for you? It's a question we must answer if we are to respond in truth and action. It's a question that's just as much about stewarding of our time and resources as it is about our souls. It's a question that is governed by grace. Grace to give. Grace to give actively of our time and our resources and our energy to meet the needs of others and to follow the model of Christ's selfless nature. Grace to reflect, grace to consider the deep sacrificial nature of love and how you can embody this love more fully, recognizing we all share a common need for love and understanding. Grace to act, to move beyond words, putting your love into something that is made manifest, something that is made real, that supports and uplifts others. Moving your spirit through prayer and your body throughout the church and community by taking action. Grace to connect, to foster genuine connections within this place here in this church, in this broader community, wherever you may go, ensuring no one feels alone or unsupported, and to continue to nurture the connectionship with God who lays that sure foundation for it. And grace that empowers, grace that encourages and empowers us to help others and to also live out these values of deep sacrificial love, creating an effect of love and positive change within our wider community. Friends, as we contemplate the immeasurable value of one another, of our brother, of our sister, of our neighbor, those who we don't even know yet, let us embrace the call to love unabashedly. the kind of love that Christ demonstrated, the type of love the Johannine community urged us never to forget. This love is not passive, it's active. It is challenging, it is transformative. It will change the way we think about ourselves and the world. It demands that we move beyond just saying and into the realm of doing, where truth and faith is manifest. Let us not be content with just offering what is comfortable, but instead commit ourselves to tangible acts of kindness and sacrifice that reflect the heart of God. So as we go forth, let us remember that in every moment, every decision, every opportunity we have to help a brother or a sister or a sibling, we are not just acting on our own, but we are participants in this great divine love that sustains and transcends our world. Let this knowledge empower us to act boldly, to love deeply, and live out the teachings of Christ in every aspect of our lives as we live and move and have our being. Amen.